attend this webinar. For Now Go Start, this is the third part in a series of webinars we've done. The first was discussing success and failure in starting a business. The second focused on the process and tools for validating ideas. And today we'll be discussing business models and how you document and utilize them in your early efforts of creating a new business venture. Our hope is by the end of this presentation, you'll feel comfortable with why you need to think in terms of a business model and how to quickly generate one using the popular business model canvas approach. So the next few minutes, we'll be reviewing the difference between a business plan and a model and describing how to fill a business model canvas. And we have 2 or 3 examples of canvases that are complete so you can understand how it works in practice. And wrapping up this, we'll describe the next steps after you've got your business model canvas filled out, how to validate your business. So this should leave us with maybe 20 to 15 minutes of Q&A time to wrap up the hour. So let's just get started. Let me introduce my partner today, Scott Schief.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Hey, everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us for the hour. As Todd said, my name is Scott Schief. I'm the Global Director of Innovation at a company called Greif. Greif is a global industrial packaging company. We make intermediate packaging like steel drums, for example, that companies use to store and ship their goods. Greif is, like I said, it's the world's #1 provider of steel drums. We're a global company. And within that, I'm working on building an innovation system that has traditionally, we've been a commodity manufacturing company. So trying to bring that innovative slant and using the lean startup tools that we're going to talk about today within a corporate setting. Before Greif, I worked at a company called Battelle here in Columbus for about 20 years. My last role there was director of the Internal Research and Development Investments Program. That role there at Battelle was very much like what a startup portfolio company like Drive or Horizon 2 do, only internally focused within the enterprise there. So I specialize in what you might call the corporate startup, but all the thinking tools and techniques that we use there and are very similar to what we're going to talk about today and what you can use in your life as you think about starting a new business.
Cool, thanks, Scott. So my name is Todd Whittington. I work at Horizon 2 Labs. So Horizon 2 Labs is a startup studio and innovation consultancy group. So we work with typically large corporate clients to develop both innovation programs and to help them formalize ideas that would eventually end up in spin-outs in their own startups. I've got about a 20-some-year career between working with startups and in the enterprise itself. I started my career, probably the dream job is an entrepreneur. I was in a large corporation and given a fairly multi-million-dollar budget with the edict to basically create products and services. So it was a fun time there. But I got the itch to kind of spin out on my own, so I've been doing that for about 10 years. So we're going to start basically with what our perspective is of a startup, and that is, if there's one word that characterizes it when you're trying to create a new venture, and that's uncertainty. So uncertainty is, you can use it interchangeably with the word risk as well, but it's basically what kind of keeps you up at night in cold sweats worrying about how this is going to work. And there's a lot of different questions, particularly when you're first starting. Things like, who should I hire? What platform should I use? What marketing partner should I go with? Do I need developers? How much money am I going to need? And then there's a couple big ones. Do you have a problem that's worth solving? And ultimately, is the solution that you're going to come up with something that people are going to be willing to pay? So when we look at a startup at the early stages, it's really a systematic way of reducing this uncertainty through a process of validation and minimizing the risk as you go to market. So through that, there's often a discussion between a business plan and a business model, and Scott's going to dive a little bit more in detail here.
So the bulk of the talk today is going to center around the business model, and that's our intention. We're going to talk in a lot of detail about what it is and why we recommend it as one of the most important tools in your arsenal when thinking about starting a new business. We wanted to spend some time up front talking about the differences between a business model and a business plan. And the reason is that gets people tripped up a little bit. You'll hear those terms often used interchangeably, but they're really not. A model is by definition an abstract representation of something in the real world, something tangible in the real world. And a business model is just that. It's an abstract representation of a real world business, only it's represented in somewhat of a cartoon manner on a piece of paper. On the other hand, you'll hear the term business plan a lot. So we want to make sure you understand how they fit together. The plan, by definition, details or lays out details around how you are going to achieve something. The business model, in a lot of ways, is an articulation of the strategy. It's a good way to think about the model versus the plan. The business model can be thought of as the overarching strategy, where the business plan is the execution of that strategy. So you can use the business model to quantify the insights you have. We'll talk about something called the value proposition later. We'll talk about using the business model as a tool to validate those insights and why that's so important. And we'll use the business model as a tool to think through the strategic elements of your business, things like partners and channels, etc. Those are things that you need to have in place or have an idea about to be successful. And its real value comes in that it's a form that we'll describe today that's really easy to use and supports this idea of iteration and validation along the way. The business plan, on the other hand, complements the strategy or complements the model with the execution details behind that model or behind that strategy. The business plan is often a more formal articulation of the business model. It's often used when you need that formality. For example, if you're trying to apply for a loan, a bank is going to want to see a formalized business plan. It shows professionalism and diligence on your part. And it's also a more detailed articulation of a story. It lays out your vision, your short and long-term goals. It could talk about what kind of legal entity or structure that you plan on setting up. And we've talked about in the previous two webinars how important the team is that you surround yourself with. And the business plan is a great place to articulate your management team, and it gives stakeholders or potential investors a good sense of security that you're going to surround yourself with the right people and that you have a good articulation and a good feel for how you're going to execute on your plan. Another important aspect of a business plan is risk identification, and then your approach to management of those risks. You'll hear lots today, and as you set out on your journey for creating a new business, every day you're going to be hit with new issues and new risks that you have to deal with, and the business plan is a great way to start getting ahead of those things so that you're not caught off guard. The big picture thing is that it makes you think through all of these things, put those ideas to paper, and then it's real, and it can be used as real internal validation of your approach. The models that we'll share with you today are great for getting vectored in the right direction. These are the business models of the business model canvas tool that we're going to talk about. It's great for iterating and tuning your ideas. The plan, when you're ready, is what puts all of that into place. The good news is that working through the business model, which we'll talk about mostly today, you'll already have in your mind everything you need to build a great business plan around that model. So a little bit of foreshadowing here is, why is it important to think about building a business model ahead of a business plan? Well, one thing is it's super fast compared to writing a business plan, which could take several weeks. You can outline multiple possible business models on a canvas in an afternoon. The model is portable. It's typically represented in a single page. It's much easier to share with others, which means that it will be read by more people. And then it gives you a vehicle to get as much validation and feedback, which is super important, into your business model. It's typically very concise, and this is what we recommend. The lean canvas, which we'll talk about, forces you to distill all of your thoughts and ideas to the very essence of your product. You may only have 30 seconds to grab the attention of an investor. Over a metaphorical elevator ride, for example, everybody's heard of the elevator pitch. You may have only 10 seconds to grab the attention of somebody on your landing page that you put up. The business models are effective. They're shown to be effective. And whether you're pitching to investors or giving an update to your team or your board, these tools will allow you to effectively document and communicate your progress as you move along your business creation journey. Thanks, Todd.
Yep, thanks, Scott. So a little bit of history here. So the representation and tool that we often use to document a business model is what we call a business model canvas. So in 2010, Alexander Ostrander published a book called Business Model Generation. So in it, he and his co-authors had presented this idea that you could take any business model and map it to one graphical page, and it was called a canvas. And the idea really took off, particularly around this time. The Lean Startup was written by Eric Ries. That was in 2011. And the two ideas kind of came meshed together around lean validation, and the canvas became really the go-to tool for any type of lean startup. So the purpose of the business model canvas really is to be able to quickly document any product idea. It could also be a process improvement, as well as just a completely new startup venture. It's designed to be really lightweight, easily changed as new information comes in and validates the assumptions. And ultimately, the canvas serves as like a snapshot of what you think the business is today and as a foundation for future innovation efforts. At first pass, each section, you got to think about this as unvalidated assumptions. And ultimately, through the process of lean validation and lean startup, you're going to test each of these components through an experimentation. So in practical application, the business model it can also be used like a collaborative tool. You could use it online, or you can put it with a large format with groups focused on lean innovation can jointly discuss the elements and use a canvas kind of as a background tool that promotes, creative exploration and experimentation. So there's actually been multiple different types of businesses canvases over the years. So the first one we just talked about, the one from Alexander Ostrander, is what we're calling the classic business model canvas. This has 9 boxes, key partners, key activities, key resources, value proposition, customer relationships, channels, customer segments, and then cost and revenue boxes. Now, over time, there's been versions of this to apply to various different industries. There's been a charity model canvas, which kind of de-emphasizes the revenue aspect. There's been one based on Reid Hoffman's blitzscaling, a very popular course at Stanford. And then the one that the iteration called Lean Canvas, Ash Mura represented his book in 2010 called Running Lean. So in my own experience working with clients and startups, I use the Lean Canvas probably about 75% of the time, and the classic one the rest. The reason is that the Lean Canvas adds boxes for problem, solution, key metrics, and unfair advantage, and those replaces key partners, key activities, key resources, and customer relations from the classic business model canvas. And the reason of that is it feels that the Lean Canvas is a little bit more customer problem focused than the classic one. And it steers you to build a business model and think about solutions and problems that address customer needs. And that's really what, you get down to the brass tacks of what's happening here is you've got to somehow create customer value and identify customer needs and match those. So, and you also have a little bit of an emphasis on unfair advantage to get you ultimately thinking about, down the line, what's going to be a sustainable, successful business model. And we use metrics also to encourage the iterative step-by-step development process, and KPIs are a way to measure your progress. So again, kind of mentioning how this is used in practice. You can put it on a whiteboard, large format, use Post-it notes, and the Post-it notes kind of lends to the fact that this is not unlike a business plan, which might be kind of an edifice that persists over time. This is meant to be very temporary. So if something doesn't work, or you want to quickly evaluate different kinds of concepts, well, you just throw a Post-it note up there. And then, of course, you can do it online or paper, and we'll have some resources available at the end that will give you some places you can find the business model canvases and lean canvases to use for your business. So next few slides, we're actually going to go through the Lean Canvas and describe some of the boxes and what we're really focused on. So typically, when we start with a new concept or business idea, we want to identify the highest risks first. and start to validate those. So in most situations, what we're talking about are the problems, who has the problems, and what the solutions are. So problems and customer segment uses are the two boxes we focus on first. So for problems, this is how you document it, very lightweight. So start listing out what your top 3 problems that you're trying to solve. And also important to think about, how do customers today solve that problem? And then some additional considerations and questions that go into that thinking process is, what problems or pains are we promising to resolve? How serious are they? What's the scope? How does this affect a single person or whole organization? Do customers know they have a problem, and are they willing to pay for it? Is the customer aware they have a problem, actively seeking a solution, or are they keep creating their own kind of bootstrap, cobbled together solution? And then what kind of budget and funds do they typically have to buy kind of that solution? And again, how do customers solve that now? Oftentimes, if it's a real problem out there, people are putting together a solution, so they're going to have to transition from what they're doing now to you. So what's it going to take for them to fire their old solution and hire you? And then looking over at customers, create a list of customers and users, and you create personas and segmentation around how they buy. It's also important to identify who the early evangelists are. So these are individuals who really have a burning need to solve the problem. And so they're willing to pay for an early version that may not have all the bells and whistles, everything ironed out, simply because it's important to them to solve that problem. Also think about decision people who make purchases. So oftentimes the customer may not be the actual buyer, particularly in the enterprise environment. So who's making the purchase decision? Identify each person as a user, someone who influences, someone who could recommend, who's a buyer or a decision maker. And also it's interesting to kind of document how the customer currently works through process by process. We call this a workflow, and how they'll change with the future workflow with your solution. So those are the first 2 boxes. Now we kind of move on to the middle one, which is the unique value proposition, and then the solution. So a unique value proposition, we define it as a promise of value that is going to be delivered to the customer. So it's sometimes thought about as a single focus message that explains why your solution is different and it's worth buying or using. So it explains how the product solves the problem. It delivers a quantified value and benefits, and why the solution is better than a competition. So sometimes the unique value proposition, or UVP, can be confused with simply a slogan or tagline, and while certainly that's the foundation of it, it can be the basis for a lot of efforts around marketing and messaging, and also for customer conversion. And just like any of the other boxes, you can test this through experimentations and sprints. So again, in the appendix and the follow-on document, there's 9 different kind of classic ways to create a UVP. And I'll just give you one example from Dave McClure of 500 Startups. He called it the elevator UVP. His guidelines were very simple. It was to keep it short and memorable and address the 3 a what, a how, and a why in 3 keywords or phrases. One example is Mint.com, the personal finance site. Mint.com is free, easy way to manage your money online. So that's pretty simple there. Now let's talk about solutions. So the solution obviously is what you're coming in here and building. It's the essential features that solve the problem. So some other considerations around that are, what's the minimal set of features and benefits that customers will pay for? Think about what your final product vision will happen to be. Now we're going to move on to what we call basically the marketing operation components of the canvas. And we'll first discuss about channels. So channels are basically, how do customers find and buy your product? It's marketing. Consider your sales and acquisition funnel. So what in an acquisition funnel, you think of a customer coming in various stages, from recognizing they might have an issue or problem they want solved, being aware of your product, and how does that customer go through each of these phases, from basically curiosity to ultimately purchasing it. Maybe you have distribution or sales partners. Start analyzing which one of those are most effective. How do you integrate sales with the customer routine? Getting your customer solution in front of them when they have the greatest need to solve it. Next, a big one, of course, is the revenue model. So how do you make money? Here, start listing out very specific quantitative pricing plans you might put together. What's the long-term value of a customer? Maybe if you're in a SaaS business or a membership business, it's not just a one-time sale, but it's keeping that customer on as long as possible. So what's the return on investment? How much time, money will your product save the customer? We often use a 3x to 10x rule. If your product cost is a tenth of what is going to save the customer, then you've got a really great opportunity to have product market fit. How is your customer going to pay? How would they prefer to pay? And if you have multiple revenue streams, how that contributes to the overall revenue. Then, of course, we go over to costs. So what are the most important costs that's inherent in your business model? What are the assets that's going to require to offer and deliver your value proposition? What key resources are most expensive? And while it is important here to realize a fairly obvious point, but one that often happens not to give proper consideration, is that if you want to run a for-profit business, your revenues need to be more than your costs. So here's where that equation comes into play. Now, if you're a venture-backed company, that may not be the case, because what you're really trying to drive for is market share rather than that profit. But basically, the unit economics have to work out, and that's where between the revenue and cost structure boxes you work. Now, Scott's going to talk a little bit around KPIs and why that's important.
Yeah, so thanks, Todd. KPIs are really important. And for those that don't know what a KPI is, a KPI stands for a key performance indicator. And what it is, it's just a measure of some function of your business. And the why they're important is that they provide an unemotional view into your business. You have to make sure that you trust yourself and be disciplined enough up front to create good KPIs at the beginning, and then listen to those KPIs, listen to what they're telling you, listen to those signals so that you can avoid a lot of long-term headaches. Oftentimes, we don't know ultimately until there's no profit, which is the ultimate lagging indicator as to whether or not a business is successful. But if you're creative, you can instill a set of leading indicators that will give you a very good idea of whether or not your business is on the right trajectory. So let me talk just a little bit about the difference between leading indicators versus lagging indicators, or lead measures versus lag measures. And kind of a real world example is, you think about weight loss. A lot of people worry about maintaining a healthy weight. Well, when you actually get on the scale, that's a lagging indicator of your current weight or your weight loss goal. What a leading indicator could be the number of times you exercise, or the number of miles you've run, or the number of calories you've consumed. Those leading indicators, if managed properly, then lead to success in your lagging measures. So it's important to consider leading indicators, because they have the greatest ability to lever you towards your success, versus lagging indicators, which typically happened in the past, and there's nothing you can do about it. Obviously, the ultimate lagging indicator is profit, but you can't track profit early on, and you really won't have the ability to gain profit, especially if you're a business that expects to lose money for a while, for a long time. So some examples of some leading indicators are number of external validations of your business model, for example, a number of iterations on that business model, number of early adopters or hits to a landing page. These kinds of leading indicators will give you a sense of the health and the sense of, and validate their further validation as to whether or not the business is a good business or not. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So we got one final box on the lean canvas, and that is the unfair advantage box. So the unfair advantage box is basically, what is our defensible strength that we have that competitors can't copy or buy? You can think of this through, it could be features, it could be patent protection, it might be unique relationships, such as supply chain relationships that others can't copy. And then there's market share dominance, being the first, capturing enough, and then ultimately things like brand and design could be unfair advantages as well. So that's the walkthrough of the Canvas, particularly the lean one. Again, not all sections may not be relevant to everybody. However, we feel like the customer problem solution along with the value proposition are really the fundamental key components that you need to have in place before progressing through the next steps of validation. And remember, between each one of these statements we put up here, if it's a post-it note or whatever, there's a set of assumptions behind that you have to ultimately test. So we're going to dive a little bit more deeper into the importance of the value proposition and the customer. Scott's going to explain that with the value map.
So before we get into the interesting case studies, we'll take a quick diversion with just a couple of slides to talk more specifically about two elements of the Canvas. We have talked, and we will continue to talk a lot about validation in this hour, and we've spoken about it many times in the previous two sessions. Because this is such an important topic, this idea of validating early and often, we wanted to spend a little bit of time going into a little deeper into two aspects of the business model Canvas that together build a really important tool in and of themselves. And in my humble opinion, it's the heart and soul of the business model. So we call this relationship between the value proposition box and the customer description box the value map. Next slide. So this is a different representation of those two boxes. The value map makes you think about things from the customer's point of view. The value map on its own is a great way to begin socializing the concept with others, and it's an easy mechanism to support iterations without getting wrapped up in all the rest of the business model Canvas. And you can really focus on just these two elements early on and to really test whether or not you have a good idea or not. And so this is really another tool or just a suggestion on how you can vet your good ideas from your bad ideas early on without putting a ton of work in. So as I mentioned earlier, I work for Greif, and Greif is a $6 billion company. But all of our ideas that run through our innovation funnel are still tested using this one piece of paper. And we do this from our tiniest ideas all the way up to our giant ideas that may even be like $1 million M&A kind of things. We're always testing ourselves with these kinds of tools. So quickly, let me go through the elements of this a little bit deeper. On the right side is the customer profile. So this to me is one of the hardest mindset adoptions for new entrepreneurs. And if I could leave you with one single takeaway from me from this talk, I hope that you can remember just this one thing. Everything you think about, everything you do needs to be put in the context of the customer. Meaning that if you're writing things down that says, I would like to do this, or we are going to do this, or this would make it easier for us, you're thinking about it in the wrong context. You need to put this in the context of the customer's perspective and the customer's words. Sometimes you'll hear people call the customer profile a segment, and that's just these are just fancy words for who you're going to try to sell this thing to. On the customer profile, we like to think about things like gains, describe the outcomes that the customer wants to achieve. And again, this is thinking it from the customer's perspective, independent of a solution. What are they trying to do? What tangible things are they seeking to try to accomplish? Think about it in terms of customer pains. So what's preventing the customers from achieving their goals? And this could be a million things. What risks do they think about? How do they worry about their jobs? What keeps them up at night? And then from a jobs perspective, describe what they're actually trying to get done in their work and their daily lives. And again, I can't express it enough that it's really important to express all of this in their own words. And on the left side of the chart is the value proposition. This is what we talk about when we talk about mapping what we can bring to the customer to meet their needs and solve their problems. Now, here is where you start thinking about what we can do, what I can do, and what my business is going to provide. And each element on the left should be a function of the elements on the right. They map. We talk about gain creators. How does what you're offering create gains for the customer? How do they solve those problems? How do they provide avenues to accelerate success for the customer? When you think about the product or the service, which is the left side triangle in the square, this is the tangible thing that you are going to build and provide to your customers. Could be a service, could be a product, whatever it is, but it's a tangible thing. And what's sort of interesting about that is that most times, in my experience anyway, when I've talked with new entrepreneurs or even enterprise innovation experts, is that it's so easy for us to get wrapped up in the things that we do really well and the thing I can build today. And people tend to think that's the entire ball of wax, when in reality, the actual thing you build is really just a small part of a smaller part of the bigger business model canvas. And that's a really important realization that I think will be very powerful if you kind of get that into your mindset as you're thinking through this. So the thing to remember is that this is not easy. You're going to mess this up, and you have to iterate on it. You got to get out of the building. You got to validate this with real customers and real stakeholders. But once you narrow in on something and you find that fit between a problem and something that you can bring to satisfy that problem, that's when the gold is. That's really where the excitement happens. But once you narrow in on it, you find that fit, then you can start building, think about how you're going to build a business around that idea. Because a lot of times, frankly, you can find a really good challenge to go solve, and you can have or be able to build a solution to that problem, and people still might not pay for it, or you still might not be able to build a real business around it. But unless you have that map and have that good fit, then it doesn't make a lot of sense to thinking about how you can build a successful business around it.
Cool. Thanks, Scott. So now we're going to go through a couple real examples of things that we've worked on in the past. So set the frame here. So this was a client who was a fairly large energy company, and they wanted basically a new tool for their sales force. So it was an internal product, not necessarily a complete startup or a spin out. And the problem they had was the sales force would go out and they would quote different clients on energy transfer. So, but the problem was that the quotes took over 24 hours. And if they happened to have multi-locations, let's say a franchise locations, it took well over 2 days. And so what the reps were using in the field was basically a paper-based system, and then they would call into the home office and get the information. So who were the customers? Well, it was the field sales representatives, the salespeople out there. But also the other user in this scenario was the sales support staff. So it was the home offices generating the actual quotes. We identified the early adopters would be basically those tech-savvy representatives that didn't have a problem with utilizing mobile technology, and also are motivated to aggressively expand their sales base. So they're willing to try new things, which is often kind of the inertia you'll find in an organization when you implement new processes and products. Our unique value proposition. So a lot of times we like to put a brand name around something, even if it doesn't require it, just to give it a little bit more tangible feel. So we call this one Quote Master. So our UVP for this was Quote Master connects real time for the most accurate prices for our customers. And the solution was a real-time quote tool. It was a mobile application. And we also implemented what in terms of the jargon of the industry, a ladder system for multi-locations. The channels we used, so this was going to be internally distributed through regional offices. So even though it was an internal product, we still had to think about in terms of marketing and adoption and how we were going to get it in the hands of the salespeople. So there was a marketing plan that was created through a rollout training. That was the channel we used. Revenue, not necessarily any direct revenue from this, but we could track basically the net gain in revenue using this over a A/B test between sales reps in the field that were still using the paper-based system. The cost, well, it was going to cost about $250,000 to actually develop the software, and there was going to be ongoing infrastructure support of, just under $100,000 a year plus some API fees as well. And the cost of acquisition, so this is the KPI we were using. If we could get the cost of acquisition of acquiring a new customer under $1,000, that was going to be a financial success for this program. And then time to close is another metric that was going to be used. Unfair advantage. So basically, no other energy company at the time was providing pricing as fast as accurate. Now, ultimately, they could catch up, but we had that unfair advantage for a significant time in the marketplace. So that's the lean canvas, I also wanted to go through an example of the classic canvas. So the client in this case was an international furniture company, and they were interested in expanding and innovating into alternative augmented reality and virtual reality. And so where we ended up basically was, again, so this is classic, so we don't have the problem solution. We usually start the value proposition for this one. We came up with something called a Zuni room. So Zuni is Chinese for virtual. So Zuni rooms were the future of the office experience. So to give you an idea, these would have been installed in corporate offices. So the home office would have basically a war room with the specialized furniture and VR equipment. And it was designed so that the people that were working in the space could creatively develop and design and problem solve. Think of an agile product team or a design team. And the idea is that as people become used to the space they're in, there's visual cues that help them, basically relax and stuff. So the use of wall, open space, other visual landmarks helped aid in creative expression by reducing basically mental load of the team through spatial memory versus short-term memory. So there's a little bit of science behind this. And the idea was you would have one of these rooms in the corporate office, but in a distributed workforce, the home office worker would have their own small little kit that they would put on the glasses. They would have reactive furniture, and they felt that they were in the same Zuni space as the rest of the team. So kind of appropriate for what's going on in the workforce today. The key partners for this, we had, it was a furniture company, so we needed to partner with someone who was expert in VR equipment. So that happened to be Oculus, a division of Facebook. Other key partners were software developers. And the real one we had to build was a network of contractors to install these rooms in corporate offices. And the segments we were going after, so there were large enterprise companies, over 1,000 employees that employed remote workers. And had work from home programs or distributed workforces. And the main target client was a large consultancy group that had 50 different offices around the world. So they were going to be the test market for that. Moving over here to key activities. Key activities of this business was app development, also hardware and production of the furniture, also supporting the partners. Key resources were going to be designers, app dev, sales force as well. So how do we make money off of this? We were going to sell these kits and the retrofits to the home offices. So that'd be hardware, furniture, also consulting services around space utilization. And then we'd have packages for remote workers, and this will all be wrapped around a monthly membership pricing. The biggest cost for us was going to be one, going in and retrofitting the home offices for these Zuni rooms, so it's equipment. Also customer acquisition, we needed a sales force, product development, hardware manufacturing, and then of course the big one is going to be the AR, VR app development. Channels, so this was going to be a direct sales force going out and calling on, augmented with trade shows, and then potentially using affiliate marketing as well. And the customer relations was our account representatives and some online support. So you can kind of see the difference between the classic and the lean, and why maybe we prefer the lean a little bit more, because it really targets what Scott was mentioning about the customer and the value proposition, while the classic kind of replaces those with more operational aspects to it. So I think we have time for one more. So this is not a real example. This is just something speculative. If we were just going to create a business, and the setting, I guess, here is a cleaning company, a service using the lean canvas. So what's the problem? Well, with COVID, maybe there's a need for sanitation of spaces where people occupy that goes beyond what the typical cleaning service can offer. So for example, if there was an office and someone had been tested positive, maybe there's a procedure where you need a deep clean or something like that. And then who would need this? So the customer user segments might be office managers. It could be special event coordinators, such as for weddings. Maybe janitorial companies themselves, like current cleaning companies, could use this service to augment their own. Retail, restaurant owners. So anyone who operated in a high trafficked area where contaminated surfaces could cause an infection, and there was a high perceived value that you needed to overcome that. So And what would our unique value proposition be? Again, kind of putting a silly name to it, we call it Puritize Clean Team. So UVP for Puritize it's the industry leader in deep cleaning your space to prevent the spread of germs and diseases. So quick and simple. The solution, we're going to have specially trained cleaners that are using the most effective products and services techniques available. Channels, so channels again is what your marketing efforts to get the customers. So we'll probably have a direct sales force that calls on office managers, caterers, building managers, and we'll have a website and then maybe some social marketing that goes along with this. So revenue model. So I think most cleaning companies charge by the square foot for businesses. So maybe our model is a little different. Maybe you hire us and maybe it's a per person fee. Maybe there's a on-site visit fee plus a per person. And we also could have our own side branded Puritize Clean products as well that we could sell. So again, we're just throwing this stuff up there completely speculative. All this could be tested in the marketplace, particularly around pricing is another very important thing to do. So what's our cost structure? Well, we got the cleaning supplies, but really in a service business, it's labor is the biggest cost structure. So I've got, maybe we pay our people a little bit more, probably the average cleaner makes $12 an hour, maybe we double that to get higher quality people that are really going to focus on solving the issue. And then the other big cost would be, acquiring basically the customers. KPIs, maybe it's, you think about keeping a ratio of how many people space per clean per hour. So putting a metric on the cleaners that they are efficient. The only danger there is when you put efficiency measures on individuals, they may tend to cut corners just to hit the milestone or the benchmark. So maybe we couple that with the customer service rating or a survey to make sure that the quality is being consistent. And our unfair advantage, well, we specialize in techniques and we have highly trained and staff, and maybe we have some trade secret products we use as well. So that's an example of just kind of throwing together a quick idea. You see how fast that was? That was less than 10 minutes, and we came up with a business that may or not, it may or not work. So that's what's important is the next steps. What do you do once you've got all this together? And Scott's going to take over.
Thanks. So all of what we've discussed so far is based in the lean innovation theory. And that theory is rooted in the idea of making small bets, incremental improvements, and quick iterations, especially at the beginning, so that you can limit the amount of time and potentially money you spend working through the bad ideas and focus your energy on pivoting towards ideas that are good ideas and that can demonstrate some traction in the market. The only way to know if you have a good idea is to get some external validation. In the lean startup terminology, this is called the build, measure, learn loop. This is especially important in the beginning before you get so entrenched in an idea that it makes it really difficult. It could be emotionally difficult, but also financially difficult to pivot or to change directions. The use of the business model canvas is designed to operate within this process. Your canvas you can think of as an experiment. You iterate on your model and you test with your experiment and get feedback, get data back, get results back, get validation back, and you take that feedback and you use that feedback to improve your model. The goal is validated learning. A great way to facilitate this with the business model canvas is to maintain a list of assumptions as you work through the process. It's like, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How are we going to do it? Every element on the business model canvas that we've talked about comes with a set of assumptions. It's actually really difficult. It's human nature to not be able to see those assumptions, but it's really important to challenge yourself to think through. When I put something down on the piece of paper, what are the assumptions that I'm making here? You can use the assumptions then to focus the kinds of questions that you'll ask in your external interviews. It's not good enough to just take your business model canvas and slide it across the desk and ask for somebody's feedback. You need to go in with some questions to spawn the open dialogue and the feedback mechanism with the people who are giving you your validation. And the assumptions are a great way to do that. If I'm making an assumption, for example, that people like, cheese on my cheeseburgers, maybe that's a question I should ask. And and then I can get some feedback back to say whether or not I should pivot my business to cheeseburgers or hamburgers. So the important thing to know is that you got to take that feedback back into your business model, and you rinse and repeat, and you do this iteratively. And the more times you do it, the higher the likelihood is that you'll get vectored into the right direction. Every iteration you go through gives you a stronger business model. Or, and what might be more important, is it might signal to you that you need to consider to pivot, or even more drastically, potentially giving up on the idea. If you're getting lots of feedback back that says these are bad ideas, and you're not able to pivot into something that seems like it has some traction, then you need to be honest with yourself and think, maybe this isn't such a great idea today.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. That's it for our formal presentation on business models and business model canvas and applications. So I think at this time we've got a few minutes, maybe solicit some questions from the group.
Looks like Sam's having some trouble. Do you want me to? Actually, I'll go ahead and start here, Todd. So this is probably a good question for you. Are there any open incubators in Columbus?
Incubators, there's some specialty accelerators. So an accelerator is basically a time box between 10 weeks and 3 months. There are a couple now that are focused more on very specific industries, nonprofits, I think. There's no main incubators I know of. There's Rev1 has a program, you can interface with them, but nothing right at this moment. I think you'll probably see a lot more activity in the fall because people are just getting their heads around how to run a virtual accelerator versus having one in person. So I think probably towards the end, September, October, you might see a few more programs popping up right now.
Sorry about that, guys. I was having a few issues with Crowdcast. So we do have another question from M. It says, can you provide an example where the unique value proposition is something that addresses/solves a societal problem? Example being helping improve the ability for people in poverty to gain access to healthy food.
So what I would say that if I had one of those in my pocket right now, I'd probably be trying to make a business out of it. Yeah. So these questions are, it's a really great question, and I think it's a great hypothesis on which to start thinking through the whole process that we talked about today. There are I'm not aware of any businesses, especially here locally. I just don't play in those circles that are trying to address these problems today. But without answering your question, I would say it's a great thing to start thinking about. Maybe there is a business that you can build around it. Todd, do you have any color to that?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. And then if you want to, again, some of the resources we'll send out later, we'll have some basically workshop kind of tools on how to develop a value proposition. So look for those afterwards.
And then Mark Russell earlier had made a comment that his work with startups has proven that the unfair advantage is the hardest to identify and articulate. So I don't know if you guys wanted to get in more detail or provide, a few more examples of determining what that is and kind of fleshing it out, depending on.
Yeah, and it's last in the order that you do things for a particular reason, because it is one of the more difficult things as for a startup to wrap their heads around, unless there is very specific IP protection around it. So if there's a patent no one can copy, then obviously that's an unfair advantage. I think it's mainly put in there for you to think about and consider going forward. The big ones. Brand is probably the most important one if after you get past the startup stage. Market share is another one, being 800-pound gorilla, but you can't get those things out of the box. So thinking about particular relationships is another one that you can have one. That would be an unfair advantage. Let's say that you had a channel partner that was going to exclusively provide your product. And it was you had a 3-year exclusive with them. So I'll give you one example. So something very similar along those lines. We had a healthcare IT startup company, and they partnered with the largest home health agency in the United States. This was 50% of the market they owned. So in that case, they definitely had an unfair advantage in terms of their channel partner. No one else could compete in that realm unless they went to a competitor, and the largest competitor had a market share of around 15%. So it's been difficult. So that's an example of an unfair advantage through the channel. Developing a moat around your solution is going to be a challenge. Again, you just basically do provide the value to your customer better than anyone else. Can it be copied? Yes. But you look at examples like Slack. Slack was nothing new. Why did it become very popular? Because they focused really well on the user experience. Could someone else focus on the user experience? Yes. The incumbent has been trying very hard to do that with Microsoft Teams, but they were at a disadvantage because they had a kind of a legacy IT system they had to deal with. Could someone come along now and uproot Slack? Yes, but now the unfair advantage Slack has is a very large user base. So that's an example of market share dominance.
Yeah, I'll just add some color to that. When you think about the business model canvas, ultimately all of this goes into trying to build a business that's going to be successful. And every element in the business model canvas gives you a lever in which to, or leverage in which to make your business successful. If you, and the unfair advantage is a super important lever if you can get it, because it by definition gives you an unfair advantage to your competition. I would say that it's a hard thing to do, but it's really important because if you do not have that, especially if you're building something from the ground up, it's really, really easy for somebody to come right behind you and one up you. If you don't have some way to protect you, build the moat, as Todd said, around your business, it's going to be very easy for somebody to disrupt you very quickly. A company like Greif, who I work for, we have a global network of plants. Somebody's not going to come around tomorrow and be able to invest the billions and billions of dollars that it takes to implement a global network of production plants that we have. So Greif has an unfair advantage in the market. Now, what we're in danger of at Greif is being disrupted by a lean, fast startup that comes up with a better packaging idea, for example. So one of my jobs is to try to look out for that. But it's really important to think about this unfair advantage. I wouldn't discount it when you're thinking about your idea and the viability of it.
And I would argue that there is some, brand perception around mission, stuff like that can sometimes serve as an unfair advantage. Think of like the Toms, the Patagonias that are, renowned for the good that they do, and how they stand out from their competitors. They may not be offering, a completely superior product, but if you can get behind their mission, what they're doing, and the benefits of going with that company over another one, they're going to be a lot harder to disrupt. So, depending on where you're going into.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think culture could be an unfair advantage, and that culture is very hard to replicate. And so the unfair advantage of culture is not just for your customers, but it's also if you rely on high quality employees, attracting the best talent, and culture is something that could be an unfair advantage in that instance.
Yeah, Sam brings up a really good point that the world, global macro trends around sustainability and around worker health and around those things are becoming more and more important to buyers. And for companies that can demonstrate that could absolutely be an advantage that they could leverage.
I believe that covers all of the questions. So unless there are any last minute ones that sneak in, I think that covers everything. Cool. So thank you everyone for attending. Thank you Scott and Todd for presenting. And I believe we'll be putting out some documents, correct, around the BMC, and probably send out a template for you guys to fill in on your own. It's easily found online as well if you don't want to wait for that. But again, thank you.
Yep, thanks.
Thanks everybody. Take care.
Bye.